Okay, welcome. So I know we're rounding out this afternoon, and you've been through a fantastic first day of the summit and heard many messages around Internet of Things. I think somebody had suggested that we need to do a little bit of a bingo game for every time you hear artificial intelligence, augmented reality, or blockchain. But good afternoon, and welcome to the session at the BCTECH Summit focused on privacy and security and grappling in the IoT age. My name is Gary Perkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Information Security Branch and Chief Information Security Officer for Government. We're very fortunate. I know the names have been introduced already, and you can probably guess which one is Joanne. But she's joined by Tyson and then Keith. And a very distinguished lineup of CTOs and Director of Technology and Risk Management. And we're going to talk a little bit about Internet of Things today and whether all is lost in this place or not, and some of the things that we can do. I just wanted to share with you first my rather schizophrenic slide that's listed on the that's shown here, but we're going to be referring to it throughout the panel. I see we do have an internet-connected mattress for anybody who was here at the most recent session, and it will tell you things that your Fitbit will tell you about things like whether you're getting a good night's sleep. I'm sure that it can tell you lots of other things about your stamina levels, whether you're alone or with somebody else. And if you consider the internet-connected toilet and what happens when it's taking readings and maybe sharing those with your fridge to augment your diet accordingly, just some pretty creepy implications of this, including the internet-connected teddy bear that we find is conducting surveillance between parents and child as they have personal conversations. So one of the challenges for us is going to be to stay optimistic and what we can do going forward to ensure that these devices don't continue to steal all of our data. And I guess it just occurred to me, like if you consider, I've read 2 books. I don't often get a chance to read novels, but if you look at the 2 novels that I did have a chance to read recently, one of them was 1984 and the other was Brave New World. It was really just a checklist to see how far we've come, or regressed, as the case may be. And it's true. I think that my prediction is that the folks that are in this room, you're going to wake up one day and look at the 300 devices surveilling you and say, wait a second, this isn't right. Each one of these devices that you brought in will have conferred some kind of advantage or benefit to you, some value. But when you find that you're trying to find that one angle in your domicile where you're not being surveilled, so you can conduct your illicit activity like reading an unauthorized book, then it really does start to be that Orwellian 1984 level scenario. So maybe he knew something we didn't. Also called the Internet of Everything, Internet of Vulnerabilities, Internet of Cheap Stuff, I've heard recently as well. I think we know that IoT poses some risks, and that's what we're here to explore today. Are we making a big deal out of nothing or not? Before we get on with the panel, I'm just going to share with you one story that I heard yesterday because it was quite topical. I was attending the Security B-Sides conference, and one of the security vendors, he says to me, and this is somebody from the security field, he bought an internet-connected sprinkler. And his kid says to him during the day, he says, why is the sprinkler on? And he says, I don't know, I didn't have it programmed to be on. He had recently patched it, which is more than you can do with most of these devices. And of course it was vulnerable, and it got hacked, and somebody changed the programming on it so that it came on for a minute and off for a minute, constantly, 24/7. Now that's in the case of a sprinkler, but what if that's your pacemaker? I kind of want my pacemaker to be on all the time. In any case. So, I was hoping to have the panelists warm them up a bit, just providing your initial thoughts on the Internet of Things, why it's so significant, changing our lives, and any experience you've directly had with it. Joanne?
I'm a little risk averse, so I'm not a huge early adopter of the Internet of Things. So, but having said that, I've got my Apple Watch on. I went through 4 Fitbits before I moved to the Apple Watch. So I've tried a few of the different devices. I tend to exercise caution and I steer my husband clear of the Internet of Things section at the Best Buy shops when we frequently go there. I think that there's a little bit of risk in using the Internet of Things, and that's like on a personal at-home perspective. I think at an enterprise level, there's a lot more risk that we haven't really fully explored. I think as an enterprise security manager, we try to do a really good job at managing our enterprise environment from a security and a privacy perspective. We do an okay job. I don't think we're ready to take on Internet of Things type devices inside the enterprise yet, so we're steering clear at the place I work, but I do see other enterprises starting to adopt different devices, like internally in their companies.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tyson Macaulay from BAE Systems. I'd like to start by saying I think things are getting probably better in this space. It's really easy to tell a horrible, scary story. There's a lot of bad stories out there. On the bright side, we're all discussing these issues right now, and we're starting to see on the consumer IoT side solutions coming to market to protect devices in homes or at least segregate networks, which is good. A year ago, there was practically nothing, and now you can actually buy solutions, for less than $100 to go into your home and start to protect the consumer devices. On the enterprise side, which is the industrial IoT, there's a lot of talk, and there are standards being developed. The solutions are still very much in their infancy there, and for me, I see most of the danger actually coming on the industrial side of things, the critical infrastructure control side of things. And again, it's really easy to tell all kinds of crazy stories about things that have supposedly happened. There's a lot of disinformation out there. But again, the market is evolving and things are getting better, in my opinion. Standards are developing and it's coming out. But I started studying this field 4 years ago, and I just published a book called Riot Control. I'm not pitching the book. I'm a bit obsessive about this, and I spent 4 years writing this book. And in the end, I come to the conclusion that the Internet of Things, you know how they say you can have stuff 2 of 3 ways. You can have it good, fast, or cheap. Well, the IoT has been fast and cheap so far. Hasn't been good. And that includes both the industrial side and the consumer side. But this is a changing situation, so I see a lot of hope for that. But even at this time, it's still very much fast and cheap. Well, what can we do about it? I guess we'll cover all sorts of different solutions here. But on the consumer side, solutions are coming largely about protecting not so much the device itself, because the devices are going to remain cheap and quickly manufactured. It's going to be more about putting things into the network that can try and compensate for the poverty of controls and security in the devices. And on the industrial side, there's a lot more rigor required around the development of the devices. And I'll stop there and I'll give someone else a chance.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cerny. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at ACL, and we work with many of the world's largest organizations, governments, military around the world, and a lot of the manufacturers who actually make the devices that are part of the Internet of Things are customers of ours. So we kind of look at it. I look at it from that side of things. What are the risks that those organizations need to be aware of from an enterprise perspective to ensure that they are doing the right things? And there are a lot of really good things happening, especially on the industrial side. But I joke that the Internet of Things, I call it the Internet of insecure junk from China. And I mean, that's unfair. I mean, Gartner estimates that there are going to be 20 billion Internet of Things devices connected by 2020. So this is happening. No matter what you feel about it, this is going to be our world. We're going to be surrounded by these devices, as Gary was talking about. They're going to be around us. They're going to be above us. There's going to be a time where you're going to tell your grandkids. I remember a time where the sky was clear and you didn't see drones everywhere delivering packages or whatnot. And, I grew up on the island of innovation, so I actually think the Internet of Things is a wonderful thing. I think there are huge quality of life and productivity benefits to be seen from it, but certainly we have to go into this brave new world with our eyes wide open.
Great, that's a fantastic segue, because that's where I wanted to start off. I mean, are we really making a big deal out of nothing? Surely there have to be some benefits. What are some of the positive ways that this is influencing our lives? Like, I've seen the examples of smart socks for babies that are anti-kind of SIDS. I've seen the predicting earthquakes and avoiding avalanches and things like that. what, if any, examples have you seen of this, positively improving life for Canadians?
Well, I mean, for me, this is very personal. My father died young of a heart attack, and I think about medical devices for monitoring something like that. So being able to see, he had one heart attack, and then 10 years later, he had a heart attack that was the final heart attack. So I think, devices that are internet connected and analyzing what's happening from a medical perspective have a huge opportunity to be truly impactful on the quality of human life. And I think, the greatest benefit to any of these things is to, prevent death, prevent injury, and to make our lives better and more productive. So I love this world. I think it's really great. It's easy to see the shadows. But I think if we have these kind of technologies and we can trust in them, I don't think anyone in this room can actually truly imagine what the future is going to look like. This is a non-linear situation that we're in today. It really is. And a couple of years from now, 5 years from now, it's going to be absolutely amazing what you're going to be able to do with these kind of devices.
I sort of look at it from the domestic front and from the industrial front. On the domestic side, don't judge me, but I bought my wife a crock pot for Christmas. And it was online. And she loved it. And she likes it because she can put stuff in it in the morning and at lunchtime from work, because she's a working mom. She'll turn it on and it's ready when we get home. So that type of convenience in the domestic front is very useful. Myself, I've automated. We have a little place up in the woods. I've automated the cottage so we turn the heat on, and rather than heat it all week long, we just heat it on Friday night. We are sort of a smart house, Joanne, and so thermostats and those sorts of things. It's reducing energy costs, increasing efficiency and convenience. So I really like that on the domestic front. On the industrial front, I think that we're going to see lots of new efficiencies coming available through reduced defects, increased monitoring, increased industrial capabilities, increased energy efficiency, and all of this is going to improve our quality of life. So I see a lot of upside there. On the downside, the security question is still out there and hanging out there, and it threatens a lot of these advances. But I look at it through rose-colored glasses, and I think the problem is addressable. And that's sort of the bottom line with me when it comes to the IoT.
So I'll take the home front and the enterprise front. So my personal non-working passion is breaking things, AKA I like to hack things. So I spend a lot of personal time playing around with these devices. I came from Best Buy before my current job and had access to a ton of IoT devices as they were rolling out before we put them on our shelves. And we spent a lot of time looking at the security and testing it within our labs and our environments to see, how long it took to hack, how long we could keep it stable, was there patches available, could we manufacture patches, could we support these devices for our customers in the retail world as well as for ourselves if we have them in our home. And if we have them in our home, can they bridge the gap between our home when we connect our work laptop to the home network at home? So, you talked about your thermostat. I've played around with a few thermostats. I messed with my brother for an entire day before he realized it was me with his home IoT thermostat. It's doable as somebody that likes to play around with technology and see where its break point is. I know for sure a lot of the devices are easily breakable. I know for sure that they're designed with fail-safes in place, but they're also designed with testing modes in place that are largely left in place, kind of like the old default passwords back in the day. Everybody talks about, oh, you install something new, change all the default passwords right away. IoT has some of the same kinds of weaknesses, and my worry and the thing that keeps me awake at night is the gap between my home network and my work network, because I do put my work laptop on my home network. So if my home network has too much IoT on it and it gets taken like your neighbor's sprinkler, what does that mean for my work device when it's actually online? It's encrypted at rest, but once I log on, everything's basically locally available on the local machine. So I try to think about these things and think about what that would mean if it exfiltrates all the way back to the enterprise network back at work. So looking at, security operations and monitoring and auditing what we do with our devices at the office. Do we have the same capability with this new technology? It's not quite there yet. I think it's coming, and I think it will come pretty quickly. Knowing that, I think that there's a great opportunity for us in the business world to leverage a lot of these things that we want to leverage in the personal world. I mean, I'd love to see a poll of the room to see how much IoT people actually have in their home, like who's got an Alexa and who's got a thermostat and so forth. Aside from the Fitbits of the world, the technology is so vast, and it starts like from light bulbs to personal wear. So we expose ourselves to some interesting things without really thinking about it because we just think it's a new gadget that's just like a new phone or something like that.
Well, that's a great question then. So show of hands, who has Internet of Things, internet-connected cheap stuff in their homes presently? And because I'm aware that some people will not put up their hands, I want to see the folks who don't. Yeah, okay. So clearly divided in the room here. Folks are not so sure about adopting this and there's half Luddites and half early adopters. I guess the way I always describe this is, for the first time, like security and privacy, we're rarely ahead of things, and I wouldn't even say we're really there on time, but usually we're in the rearview mirror. Like we're in danger of catching up at some point, and I really view that the Internet of Things is a real game changer at the pace it's going to escalate. I don't think we're going to be able to really catch up. Some of my next questions, for those who know me, I'm only willing to admire a problem for so long before I really want to get in there and figure out, even with the folks in the audience here, what are some of the things that we can do about fixing it. And there's a couple of comments on the slides. The underwriter laboratories and the CSA, that's a reference to the fact that, at one point in history, folks would buy kettles and they'd bring them home and it would electrocute them. And so eventually there were some kind of standards or regulations that were required so that folks could go there, look for that logo, and know or have reason to believe that they're not going to die if they go and use it at home. I wanted to ask the folks on the panel here, like, what if anything can we do to incent the industry, perhaps it's making informed consumers, to have some basic laws or regulations? And I proposed my first initial three are along the lines of, well, you should be able to turn it off, you should be able to disconnect it, and you should be able to update or patch it. But is that even realistic? And so, again, what are some of the things you suggest that we do going forward to ensure that it doesn't pose as great a risk or threat to us?
Okay, so I think people approach this, and it was interesting to see the poll and to see the different breakdown of people that have devices and don't. People come to this delicious problem from a number of different islands. They either come from the island of innovation, like I do, or they come from the island of security, or they come from the island of privacy. And these are interesting places. The island of innovation, everybody's like, look at my new Fitbit, I love it, any new technology, it's all great. The people who are on the island of security, they have 100-foot walls, sharks with laser beams on their head going around the island. You have to go through 13 checks in order to get on there, including a retinal exam and a DNA. And then you got the privacy island, and nobody really knows where that island is. They can't find it. It's out there somewhere. Yeah, opinions vary where it is. Everyone lives in a cone. Apparently, it's very silent inside that cone. So you have to look at where people are coming from. And last year, I was speaking in Ottawa to the government about, this problem, and everyone wants to have a solution to this. And I think there are some interesting technical solutions, and nothing is a silver bullet. There are new devices that are coming out. Dojo Labs, as an example, is creating one, and I have no affiliation with Dojo Labs, but they're creating a device that analyzes the behavior of your Internet of Things devices on your network, and it looks at what normal behavior is. And then if it starts to see something different from that, it lets you know. There's another company, I forget the name of it right now, it starts with a Q. They're actually out there mapping, just like Google Street, they're mapping the devices that are out on the internet so that you can sign in and you can see, well, which of your devices in your organization or in your home are actually, talking publicly to the network. So there are all kinds of interesting solutions coming on the technical side. Obviously, there's policy and regulation side as well. I'm not as, I guess, warm when it comes to regulations. I see what happens with regulation is that people will start to work just to the letter of that regulation. It becomes a box checking exercise. And frankly, I think it takes away the innovation going beyond that. It takes away the opportunity to exceed that expectation. So I don't love regulation, even though our entire business is basically, helps companies manage that. I think a technical problem there are some great technical solutions, and like I said, no silver bullets.
I love the first one about being able to turn it off. I think that's pretty important. If you remember back when, in the late 80s, there was a horrendous jet crash. It was Swiss Air that went down in the water just outside Halifax. And the reason it went down was because they just installed a new video system on board. And if I recall correctly, it wasn't wired properly, and it overheated, and it started to catch fire, and they saw it starting to burn, but there was no off switch. So they had no way of turning it off, even though they knew it was happening, and we know the result. But even beyond an off switch, many of these devices, you don't even know they're on. So some sort of specification that has an indicator that shows when something's on and tells you how to turn it off, and that can't be hacked. For me, a big thing that I've been working on is gateway security. A lot of these devices I don't believe are really ever going to be made securely because the manufacturers come and go. I worked at Bell Canada for a while, and back when long distance used to cost a lot, there were these entities we called Hell's Bells. And Hell's Bells would stand up and they would buy an internet connection and they'd sell early day VoIP. But you could do VoIP calls around the world for pennies a minute, whereas the phone companies were charging you dollars a minute. And what they would do is they would sell this stuff until the regulator came and said, hey, you can't do that, or you have to do a lawful access request. And they just shut down because it was way cheaper to shut down than it was to try and meet the safety or the security or regulatory compliance. So the same thing is going to persist in the IoT. Device manufacturers will pop up, they'll flood the market, and then as soon as someone calls them on the quality of their product, they're going to disappear again. So for me, the solution for a long time to come is probably going to rely in what I refer to as the gateway, or it's going to be the first hop in the network, which is often for any consumer, it's going to be your home gateway. And right now, those things are made fast and cheap, and they typically have very little security in them. But we're seeing the first generation of smart sort of home gateways coming, which can segregate devices on the network and apply firewall-like capabilities, but at consumer level. I think that's really important. And then one thing that I don't see any end in sight for, and I'm going to go dark for a minute here, is what's known as emergent behaviors. And an emergent behavior is when you get a complex system and it starts to do things that the individual components themselves should never have been able to create as an output. So an emergent behavior in a complex system is something that was entirely unexpected and comes about because of the combination of things that are in that system. And in the IoT, when we're mixing and matching all these different components from all these different manufacturers spread across different types of hybrid cloud environments with different types of networks, particularly in the industrial arena, I think we can expect some shocking outcomes from time to time. And certainly anyone who's in manufacturing could tell you about runaway processes that occurred because no one ever accounted for a certain combination of events. How do we manage that? I don't have the answer to that, but certainly in this age of incredible computing power and artificial intelligence, we can probably do better when it comes to trying to model emergent behaviors in the IoT, particularly on the industrial side.
So I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction. Managing security for the company I work for, we think about the security of our enterprise environment, but that security now has to extend into the homes of our employees and our contingent workers, because they take their corporate devices and we have alternate work arrangements so people work at home. So now my bricks and mortar security perimeter of our enterprise has extended into people's homes. So one fact, I know that 50% of this room is using IoT devices in their home. So if I just carry that statistic forward to the people that work for us, it's probably about the same. About 50% of the people have it. So while I have a accountability and a responsibility at work to secure the enterprise environment, that inherently is now extending to securing the environment for people at home. So I look at it from an IoT perspective as actually an opportunity for us at the enterprise side to learn more and extend our security controls. So you talked about a company that's coming out with some, tools that will actually give you some data back on, what your IoT devices are doing. You need those at the enterprise level, but we need those at home as well. So that instantly for me is an opportunity to provide the people that are using corporate devices with a tool that monitors both at work and at home. And if that tool is monitoring, then it's generating logs, creating alerts, and ergo feeding them back to my security operations environment and my cyber hunt team so that they can analyze and actually look at all of the vectors and data, whether it's ingress or egress or inbound or outbound data. I actually get additional data from outside the enterprise to take a look and monitor and discover and determine if there's any risk that's coming from outside our enterprise bricks and mortar environment now. So, potentially we say IoT devices are bad, they don't have this, they don't have that, they cause all kind of risk, but it is actually an opportunity, if you look at it from that perspective, for us to extend the borders and learn more about a larger environment that directly affects our enterprise environment.
Great, so learn more about our employees' homes and things that are going on there. Great.
Ergo, there's Privacy Island coming into play right there.
So I often say, I invite folks to put me out of a job or at least reduce security incidents by 80%. I say, use strong passwords and don't share them, and don't click on suspicious links and attachments. But our efforts around security awareness have only gone so far, because anytime any of you have run phishing campaigns within your organizations, you're able to ensnare people pretty quickly. So I'm curious, in this particular case, what are we going to do differently that helps us have more informed consumers? Like, do you think they're even aware of some of the risks and the challenges posed? And how are we going to ensure that consumers are able to make informed decisions? Like, because if they're sitting at the, I don't want to pick on Best Buy or Home Depot. I mean, obviously, the manufacturers that behind the retailers aren't really thinking about security here. So when the consumer is standing at the aisle and trying to choose between this one versus this other one that's $5 more, they're going to choose the cheaper one. So again, going back to whether it's regulation, how do we ensure that consumers are aware that they're inviting this into their home and doing it willingly? And as I said earlier, some of these are very consciously brought into your home, your Fitbits and your Nest. You're aware, you're getting some kind of advantage, but eventually it's going to be the RFID or in your suit, and how many IP addresses will you be wearing for anti-theft that they unconsciously brought in? So again, around consumers, how do we ensure that they're more aware?
I think on my side, at Absolute, we're launching a new security awareness program, and we plan to actually include a segment on IoT-type devices, because we realized internally when we were just planning out what we were going to do over the next fiscal year, that the people on the committee that was doing the planning didn't necessarily understand what IoT devices were and what the potential impact could be, whether it's a personal device or light bulb or whatever. I think communication and information is really important, beyond some of the traditional things that we do from a security awareness perspective. I think there's also a lot of opportunities for organizations and retailers, and I know for a fact that Best Buy is very conscious as a retailer about IoT devices. I don't know, probably most people here are Best Buy shoppers, not to plug Best Buy because I used to work there, but I shop there a lot, so. The departments that carry the IoT devices, the staff that work there are trained, and they go out of their way to share their knowledge and make you aware of what it is you're buying and what the potential, limitations are. So I think it's important that, people take the time to listen. I think they need to read a little bit. We're all on our phones. There's lots of blogs out there. Read a little bit about some of the devices before you actually buy, to make some smart choices about how you enable them and how you use them within your home and what your potential, impact could be to your workplace.
Yeah, I'm just not so sure that a lot of the folks that are going to be consuming these products are actually going out and reading those blogs, and they're probably blissfully ignorant that the largest distributed denial of service attack in history was orchestrated by Internet of Things devices, including fridges and such, aiming at Brian Krebs, right? And yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Sorry, Tyson.
Thanks, Gary. I'm glad you brought up that DDoS attack, because about a year ago, we were sitting around and we were saying, well, what if someone was able to enslave some of these IoT devices? What type of DDoS attack would they get? And then it was like August of last year, the biggest DDoS attack it tripled in size, right? It was over a terabit. So this is what I think the next big thing is going to be, and it's related to education. So we have social engineering now, and spam and phish is a form of social engineering. I'm pretty sure that we're going to see social engineering through IoT devices, and the first few attacks are going to be very effective. So let me paint a picture for you. If a smart TV were compromised, for instance, through its cloud-based system, and someone pushed a message on Super Bowl day to the screen of the TVs that said, a patch is required to address an electrical short circuit problem. For safety reasons, your TV will be deactivated in the next 2 hours unless you apply this patch. How many millions of people would go and download the patch to their smartphone or their PC to patch their TV and become infected? If there's 100 million people watching the Super Bowl, I'd say probably 3-4% would go ahead and do it. Or what if it was something in your fridge that again said, you have to patch me, or the food is going to go bad. Or if it was your car saying, we're going to shut down if you don't apply this patch. So people are going to be tricked by their devices into installing software. And that software will capture their personal information, banking details, and do all the other things that malware typically does. So social engineering through IoT, you heard it here first. It's coming. I don't know when, but I expect it's going to be bad when it gets here. What do we do about it? I've got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. And since they were very young as a parent, I've been teaching them about the internet can be a very bad place, and now they're teenagers. It's drugs and booze, and you think you're going to drive dad's car, you're kind of crazy. These types of lessons as a parent, I think you have to really drive into your kids. The schools are doing a good bit, and there's a lot of good programs which I think are important. Where we're lacking in Canada and actually around the world is in post-secondary education. We still don't have engineering degrees that have a substantial amount of network security or device security built into them. So you can go and get an engineering degree and really come out security free and risk management free after 4 years. Now in Ontario, a body of knowledge has been generated called the Critical Infrastructure Engineers, Communication Infrastructure Engineering Curriculum. And it's intended to be an engineering degree with a heavy emphasis on cybersecurity and networking in it. But it hasn't been taken up too strongly yet by the universities there, and certainly not in other parts of Canada. So there's a big issue around inertia when it comes to training and awareness around the IoT specifically and security generally.
So if I was watching the Super Bowl and that message came up on my screen, I would know that it was malware and I would still click on it. Because I got to get back to the Super Bowl. I'm not missing out. Yeah. So that's actually a really interesting attack. I have to think about that. There's other interesting angles. Like imagine if all the thermostats were compromised and it waited until it was minus 30, and then when minus 30 actually was triggered, then at 2 o'clock in the morning it shut the thermostats off. So just as a show of hands, how many people here have an unsecured wireless network at home? That's very honest of you. There's a few. So awareness works. It used to be that you could drive down the street and everyone had an unsecured wireless network. And today it's changed significantly. Some of that is because of the consumer. Some of that is because of the devices that come from the internet service providers are more secure. It used to be that you would get a device from, say, TELUS or Shaw, and they all had the same password. So, those days are over as well. Everyone gets a unique ID, a unique password, at least, not necessarily a unique ID. I think the ID is unique as well. So, I think, no offense to everyone in the room, myself included in the panel, but I think it's too late for us. I think it really, to Tyson's point, it starts with the younger generation. Some of the schools today are doing a digital literacy course, which is really helping kids understand the risks when it comes to not only, Internet of Things, but their information on the internet. I think that's a wonderful part of the curriculum, and I think it should be, everywhere. William Gibson said that, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. And I think, you know, this is one of those cases where we just need to take these good ideas and spread them out across the country. It really starts with the kids.
Right on. I think that's something we can take away from, so both of your comments resonate with me, is take away from countries like Israel where, you know, folks look to explain why they have a culture around cybersecurity, and it's very clear that it starts out in the schools. And I'm with you. I won't rest until there's a 4-year degree in cybersecurity offered in Canada, and I've already been talking to you and BC and others around here about exactly that that same thing. So a little bit harder question for you then. So
can I add a point to that? So I spoke at UBC, and one of the things that I was telling the students there, especially the ones that are in engineering comp sci, is, you know, if you have an engineering, a comp sci degree, and an understanding of cybersecurity, you're going to be the one that a company's going to pick. There are over 1 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs out there today. So the opportunity for anyone here who has kids, especially kids that are, you know, late teens or in early university, the opportunity for jobs in cybersecurity is huge. It's absolutely massive. So, you know, everyone's worried right now about their job being automated away. I think this is an area of current growth and future growth as well. And maybe one day they could have your job, Gary, and security for the whole province.
We'll have to talk about that. I don't know. I hope your kids are a little bit smarter than that. But it is true. I mean, the growth is going to be huge. They projected 2 million. I mean, there's 209,000 jobs open in the U.S. right now. They've been open for over a year. In a lot of cases, it's massive growing, and the deficit in Canada is projected to be 62 to 64,000 in Canada alone. So it is definitely a growing area like data science. So, question. How can security be an enabler for the Internet of Things? Like, how can we, can products differentiate themselves and be more successful? But I really want to ensure that the future is not all fire and brimstone. That we can enjoy a future that both has security and some privacy, unless you believe that privacy is dead.
Yeah, I'll quickly answer and then pass on. In our organization, we actually have a part of our website at acl.com/trust. And it's to communicate with our customers that, you know, we are a trustworthy organization. We have a SOC 2 report. We invest a ton of time and energy into security. And I think that business to business, organizations want to buy trust. Trust is a very sellable thing today. So I think it's more challenging on the consumer side because, to your point earlier, Gary, you know, if I'm standing in there and I'm looking at 2 Internet of Things devices, and they're equal in all ways, except one is a little bit more secure and one is, one is $20 cheaper. It's going to be really hard to resist that $20 cheaper device. So I think on the consumer side, it's challenging, but on the business-to-business side, more and more we're seeing organizations buy trust, and it's simply because there's this massive activity going on right now where organizations are putting more and more expectations on their supply chain. So they're transferring risk to the supply chain and they're transferring risk to insurance away from themselves. And I think, that side, I think it's moving quickly, but on the consumer side, it's going to take a little while.
Certainly, security can be an enabler. I think security also offers opportunities for differentiation. And I've had this discussion with lots of service providers where they want to offer an IoT service and they'd like to differentiate it with heightened levels of security on it, particularly in the industrial IoT world. If you're a network provider and your networks are more secure and you're running a high assurance communication system for critical infrastructure, then there is an opportunity to talk about security as a differentiator. As an enabler, you're seeing companies like Tesla now offering insurance with their cars at very low rates relative to what the insurance market generally charges. And part of the way they're doing that is because of the telemetry they're gathering from these devices, from the cars. When you get into security and being able to, for instance, talk about security in a domestic setting and being able to monitor security devices over the IoT is certainly going to enable new forms of business, different types of insurance particularly we see coming to market, and I see that as a big opportunity. It doesn't come without privacy risks, of course, but there's lots of interesting things in the market that will be enabled by good and secure IoT. And there'll inevitably be some spectacular failures because people thought the security was good and in fact it wasn't.
I I think as an enabler, the enablement will come first after there's some major breach that's based on IoT devices or sourced through some IoT devices. I think the enablement will come from third-party companies that actually offer the monitoring services, because I don't think the device manufacturers are going to offer the monitoring services, because we already know that there's a cost threshold to certain electronic devices that people are willing to pay. There's only so much you're willing to pay for a thermostat, or so much you're willing to pay for a personal device. If you could get the same device but with security, but it was 5 times more expensive, the consumer just doesn't want to pay for that. So, because they don't see the hard, tangible value in the security part of it at this point today. So, I think at the enterprise, the enablement is clear. We're very security and privacy centric. I think that has to spill over into the personal homes, and those of us in the enterprise world actually have to work to kind of communicate that message and try to support our staff and our personnel that are using these devices to ensure that it doesn't compromise us as well as them and make their world miserable.
Just another comment. I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think we're going to get people to buy security for the IoT too readily. But I can see how there will be transition where right now where you're looking at a business-to-consumer model where you're trying to sell security to the consumer. Some of this will transition to a B2B model where, for instance, rather than you securing your home, if you are buying in-home monitoring solutions for some type of health application, then whoever's providing that solution may just bundle in security and some type of secure monitoring device in the home as part of the overall service cost. So for, in Canada where we've got socialized medicine, if your aging father, for instance, has got some type of monitoring device in the house, it's based on IoT, it could very well come to the point where the province simply pays $1 a month to somebody to manage a secure gateway in the home as part of the end-to-end solution. And in the end, I think that the opportunity is to bundle security into these end-to-end solutions and probably move security away from a consumer decision up to a business decision, because the consumers are unlikely to make the right decisions anytime soon.
I think if we refer to your graph, the Internet of Things and how it's grown, I think right now there's probably a fairly flat line, very close to the bottom on where security is supported on these devices. But I think over time, as people learn, I think it will start to replicate what that curve looks like as well in some kind of a parallel fashion, but there'll be some lag. I think it will come. It'll just take a while for it to come. And I think there'll be some tipping point that forces that to come.
Yeah, I think I've heard estimates anywhere from 20 billion to 80 billion devices. So this one from Cisco shows 50 billion devices connected. And I often think about, well, what's arbitrarily held that back in the past or artificially or otherwise? And I think it was the IPv4 versus v6. There's just more addresses to be able to give out. So now it's not a precious commodity. So just focusing, I heard elements of the solution again. I'm very interested in what the folks, because we have such a diverse group of individuals here, what they should be doing when they go back to work on Thursday or Monday differently. And I heard elements of the solution that are, maybe there's portions of education, there's portions of legislation or regulation, although I don't hear that all of you are super enthused on that one. Maybe there's some technology involved. But how are we going to make the world a better place in the Internet of Things, given some of the challenges that you've stated here? Because personally, I don't want to waste water with my sprinkler going off in the middle of the day, but I got to be honest, I'm a little bit more worried about those pacemaker examples and the fact that, like you say, it's, I often say my job is about helping people find religion before they have an incident, because after it's really easy. In this case, we want to help avoid those fatalities or those very negative cases before, so proactively. What would be your best advice for the folks that are here in the business or as a consumer? Keith is.
So the IoT devices are largely Wi-Fi based. They all communicate on regular Wi-Fi channels, just like all the other Wi-Fi devices we have, whether it's your wireless router or whatever you have at home to facilitate internet service. So you've already heard hundreds and hundreds of messages over the past 5 to 10 years about securing your Wi-Fi device. There's still a few people that haven't done that, so you should go home and do that. That would be my number one.
Plausible deniability. I know exactly why she doesn't do it. So she can't be held responsible for anything that happens on her Wi-Fi.
So the one thing that you can take away if you're looking at, you know, some kind of IoT type device is stop and think about one, is it IoT, and ask a few questions about how the wireless is connected. So I recently went to the home show, and there's a large mobility vendor that's now offering a home monitoring service in Western Canada. It's kind of moved across the country from east to west. They have fantastic service. It's all IoT based, and it actually runs off the light bulbs that you install in your house. So you have to think about what that means if someone takes your wireless network and then takes the light bulbs in the lamps running your security in your house. So you have to think about the downstream consequences of how that Wi-Fi is protected. That's the key thing to think about. You know, in some cases, if it's a Fitbit, probably doesn't matter as much, because if someone takes your Fitbit, so what? You can reset it, you know, download everything off your dashboard again. But if it's the physical security of your house, you probably care a little bit more about that, as opposed to, you know, just your personal device.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can change the way that your computer and your Wi-Fi network work at home. But I think what I'd like to leave you with is a book recommendation. There is a book by Nissim Nicholas Taleb called Anti-Fragile, which talks about resiliency and going beyond resiliency to where you actually, as an individual or an organization, benefit from these kind of shocks that come to the system, and you find a way to actually allow it to help you to be stronger. There is no doubt that both on a individual, a municipal, a country-based basis across the world, there are going to be some significant shocks to the system, and I think as individuals we're better ready for those if we understand the kind of thinking in the worldview that something like Anti-Fragile pushes forward.
Was that Nicholas Taleb?
Yes.
The guy who wrote Black Swan?
Yeah, so Black Swan is... Yeah, he wrote Black Swan, which you don't see coming. We'll see this one, a lot of this stuff we see coming, but he also, his pinnacle of writing up to this point has been Anti-Fragile, which is, all of that is fed up into it. It's a fantastic book. Everyone should read it.
Black Swan for me was sort of the Bible of risk assessment back when it came out. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think on the industrial side, there's no shortage of guidance you can get around IoT protection, you know, because there's often money and resources and people available to do things. Not all of it's good, not all of it's practical, but there's layers you can apply. On the consumer and the domestic side, it's so much more difficult because people vary so widely in their skills and what they're willing to spend and their awareness. I'll tell you what I do. You know, I have 2 Wi-Fi networks at home, actually 3. One is, I call it IoT Ghetto, and I just put my IoT device.
Sorry, IoT Ghetto?
IoT Ghetto, yeah, it's my IoT Ghetto network. So I let the IoT devices go on this network, and they do whatever they want, and then they go out to the internet. And then I have another network which I use for my professional stuff, you know, my work computers, and then we've got one for the rest of the family. And, you know, this out of the box, I just bought a router that had 3 network capabilities in it, you know, it cost like $200. It's no big deal. But still, most people just want to use whatever their broadband provider gives them, which is generally a crappy router, and it might just have basic functionality. So that's what I did. And I'm not going to say that's the right thing for everybody, but it is an approach.
Interesting. My SSID is virus because nobody seems to want to connect to that for some reason. I can't figure it out. So I do want to give a chance for anybody else to contribute on what they think from the audience, what they think maybe part of the solution might be, or ask any questions of the folks that we have up here, again, drawing from their rich experience in security as CTOs, and then Joanne's previous experience at Best Buy, as well as now with the Absolute Software. Anybody have any questions? Has this got you thinking about IoT in a different way? Are you going to go down home and flush your Internet of Things down the toilet, and then we'll have fish running around with them in their bellies? I think that's inevitable. We have a question.
If you come up here, you can just...
No, I'll repeat it if...
You talk a lot about IoT security, but I mean, it's interesting to think about the privacy side as well. I mean, if the
Yeah, it's so easy. I mean, especially for somebody like me who's a innovation-focused person, to just completely gloss over privacy. And I think some of the things that are going on with privacy that are really interesting today are the multi-leveled privacy agreements that are in place today, where you have at the top level, you have a human-readable privacy agreement. So you can actually understand it as a regular person. And then a layer down, you actually have the more legalese privacy agreement, which is what would be used in a court to defend or negotiate between an organization and an individual or two organizations. And then a layer below that, you have sort of the machine-readable privacy, so that you can actually, machine to machine, can actually understand these. And I think there are some really fascinating and interesting things going on around privacy today in helping people understand, what is it that you're actually, what is it that you're agreeing to? When you click that, I agree, what's the implications of that? And I think we could spend another entire session just talking about privacy. And it's a great point that you bring up, because it's so easy for us technologists, I'm a CTO, to kind of gloss over the privacy side, because we're so eager when it comes to the innovation and the promise of these IoT devices.
Yeah, and I see security as one way you achieve privacy, and it is, when you consider, I forget, it was the autonomous vehicles and the amount of data that they're gathering as they're running around, and folks rarely stop to think about the implications of that. When you're gathering LiDAR data of, the drug deal that's going down on the corner or whatever, it's just gathering massive amounts of data at all times. But Joanne's going to tell me that some of these devices don't, and I'd be preferring those.
So I can tell you from my experience in my previous job, working in the lab, kind of tearing these devices apart to understand how they worked and what data they were collecting. Any IoT device that has some kind of a user interface or an app that you can use on a laptop or a phone, when you set the app up, you have to, there's a EULA of some kind that says you don't mind sharing all of the information that this device is going to harvest from your devices back to the company. So whether it's a car or whatever, if you have like I don't know, has anybody driven a Tesla? I rented a Tesla when I was in Australia last year. And every rental, you have to accept the EULA, that it's going to collect all the information that you're going to generate as you're renting this car. So if you don't want to let them collect the information, it actually doesn't let you start the car up. So you don't really have much of a choice other than you want to use it or you don't want to use it. There are a lot of IoT devices that don't have a user interface, and one that I can think of instantly is the light bulbs, because you don't have to make the light bulbs work with much of anything. You can just put the light bulbs in. You don't have to have them change colors or do any of those other things. If you don't accept a EULA and it doesn't connect it, there's some question as to whether or not they're still harvesting some of the data. The data that they do harvest, I think our definitions of PII today don't necessarily map easily to what the IoT devices harvest, but I can tell you from my experience as a cyber hunter that the data that they do harvest is intensely valuable if you're actually not doing just general security operations and alerting, but you're actually hunting for patterns and to see what's going on. So it is pretty valuable data that has a marketable dollar value associated with it that can be found on the dark web. So not to be too much of a doomsday sayer, it's definitely something to think about, from an enterprise perspective. You as a consumer, do you really care about what, hunt data is going out of your light bulbs from your house? Probably not. But it depends. If you have 3 networks, it might be a lot more interesting.
I think we're going to have to close it off, because just in the interest of time, but so I guess I'll leave it with that one sobering kind of deductive logic that says, look, if it is connecting to any kind of network, then it has some manner of operating system. And that's where my other 3 rules apply. It's kind of like, if it's connected to the internet, then it can be hacked. Everything's being connected to the internet, therefore, everything can be hacked. So maybe think about that next time you go out to purchase that Nest thermostat, and whether you want to prefer the Luddite version or perhaps the one that has a shield that says that it guarantees some higher level of security. But thank you very much for attending. Really appreciate it. Thanks to the panelists.